Welcome to Spooky Stories. Here, we explore true tales of horror stories sent in by people who have faced the unexplainable. Shadows that whisper, entities that linger, fear that refuses to fade. If you've ever experienced something terrifying, you can share your story too. The details on how to send it in are waiting down in the description. I'll choose the most chilling encounters and bring them to life here. But before we begin tonight's descent into darkness, a warning. If you're sitting in the dark, turn on a light, because after hearing these stories, the silence of your room may not feel so safe. These tales are more than just frightening. They invite things closer. When we speak of them, it's said they listen, they watch, they gather around us in the shadows. And remember, your likes truly help me. They show your appreciation and motivate me to keep working harder to bring you even darker, scarier stories. Your subscription is more than just a click. It's your welcome into the Spooky Stories family. And if you have any suggestions, or if a story really chills you, leave a comment. I'd love to hear what you think. Now, take a deep breath. Hold on to your courage, because tonight's story begins.
Fourth story. I grew up in a small farming town in the Midwest, part of a middle-class family that lived off the land. My father wasn't educated like his brothers. While some of them ran businesses or held office jobs in the city, my dad stayed behind and managed the family farms, taking care of not only his own land, but also the shares that belonged to his brothers. He gave them their cut of the harvest each season, and that's how we kept food on the table. Growing up, I spent most of my days working on the farm. But I'll admit something I'm not proud of. I fell in love with one of my cousins. She was nothing like me. She was smart, educated, and carried herself with confidence, while I barely made it through school. From the start, I knew I didn't stand much of a chance with her. But feelings aren't something you can just turn off. For a long time, she didn't give me the slightest bit of attention. I kept my feelings buried, telling myself it was just my problem to deal with. But everything changed during a family wedding. That night, she finally started talking to me. We exchanged numbers, and soon enough, we were calling each other late at night. Her voice, her words, it all pulled me deeper in. For the first time, I thought maybe she really liked me. It didn't take long before I was completely obsessed. She was in my head every waking moment. And when I finally got the courage to tell her I wanted to marry her, she avoided the subject. She changed it, laughed it off. And one night, she told me straight out, "I don't want to marry you. I don't love you." Those words cut deeper than any knife ever could. She admitted she'd never loved me, that all the sweet things she said before had been lies. My world collapsed in that moment. But instead of moving on, I did something even worse. In my desperation, I listened to bad advice. Someone told me about a man, a so-called spiritual guide, who could help me get her back through rituals. A man who promised he could make her fall for me, even if it wasn't in her heart. I should have walked away right there, but I didn't. When I met him, he looked me straight in the eye and said, "If you want her love, you'll have to prove your strength. Do what I tell you, and she'll be yours. Fail, and it could cost you your life." He explained that I would need to perform a 7-night ritual inside an abandoned cemetery on the edge of town. I'd have to dig out a shallow grave for myself, sit inside it, surrounded by candles, and chant from an old book he gave me. For 7 nights, I would call out to the unseen. He warned me that the spirits would try to frighten me, confuse me, even lure me out. But if I broke the circle, if I left the ritual unfinished, all the darkness I summoned would turn against me. And I agreed. I agreed without hesitation, blind in my obsession. That night, just after midnight, I made my way to the old cemetery on the outskirts of town. Everyone knew the place was cursed. Nobody buried their dead there anymore. The ground was too old, too wild. The wooden fences had rotted away, and weeds twisted over toppled headstones. Folks said if you passed through there after dark, you'd hear whispers following you home. I carried a small shovel, a few candles, and that damn book the man had given me. The pages were yellowed, covered with symbols and words I could barely pronounce. The air smelled of damp earth and mold, and the silence was so thick I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I found a bare patch of soil between 2 cracked gravestones and dug until I had a shallow pit just wide enough for me to sit cross-legged inside. My hands trembled as I placed the candles in a circle around me and lit them one by one. Their flickering light barely pushed back the darkness. Then I opened the book. The words didn't feel like words at all. They felt like they were crawling across my tongue, heavy and unnatural. My voice sounded strange in the silence, almost like someone else was speaking through me. The deeper I went into the chants, the colder the night grew. The wind stopped. Even the crickets went silent. And then I heard it. Soft footsteps on dry leaves. At first, I thought it might just be a stray animal, but the steps grew heavier, slower, deliberate, circling just beyond the ring of candlelight. I froze, clutching the book tighter. "Who's there?" I whispered, my voice shaking. No answer, just the crunch of steps moving behind me. I wanted to turn and look,
but the man's warning echoed in my head. Don't break the circle. Don't stop the ritual. So I forced myself to keep chanting, my throat dry, my eyes locked at the wavering flame in front of me. That's when I noticed something horrifying. A shadow. It wasn't mine. It stretched across the dirt on the opposite side of the circle, tall and thin, swaying as if someone was standing there. But when I glanced up, there was no one. Nothing but darkness. The shadow bent low, as if it were leaning in to listen. And then it laughed. A dry, rasping chuckle that scraped against my bones. I almost bolted right there and then, but I clenched my teeth, forcing myself to finish the chant. My lips stuttered over the final words, and as I spoke them, the shadow melted away. The air grew still again. By the time I closed the book, every candle had burned almost to the end. My body shook from cold sweat. I climbed out of that shallow grave, my legs trembling so badly I could barely stand. The first night was over, but as I walked home, I realized something terrifying. The footsteps were
The second night, I tried to convince myself it had all just been my imagination. Maybe I was tired. Maybe the chanting had played tricks on my mind. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. I hadn't imagined that laugh. Still, obsession has a way of crushing fear. I told myself I'd go back, finish the ritual, and then she would be mine forever. That was the lie I clung to. Just after midnight, I returned to the cemetery. The night felt heavier, like the air itself was pressing against me. I carried fresh candles, a lantern, and the book. The grave I dug the night before was still there. Its edges collapsed a little, but the soil inside looked darker, wetter than it had yesterday, like something had seeped up from underneath. I set the candles, lit them, and climbed down into the pit. My knees shook, but I opened the book and began to chant. Almost immediately, the air turned colder. My breath puffed out in white clouds. The flames of the candles bent sideways, though there was no wind. I tried not to look up, tried to keep my eyes locked on the page, but then I heard it. Whispers. Whispers. At first, it sounded like a single voice, low and hoarse. Then it multiplied. 2, 3, 4, layered on top of each other, circling me like a storm. I couldn't make out the words, but I could feel the intent, mocking, taunting, daring me to look up. I gritted my teeth and forced the chant louder. That's when the smell hit me. Rotting meat, thick and sweet, filling the air until my stomach churned. I gagged, clapping my hand over my mouth, but I didn't stop chanting. Then came the worst part. From the corner of my eye, I saw movement, small shapes darting between the candles. At first, I thought they were animals, maybe rats. But when I finally dared to glance, I realized they weren't animals at all. They were hands. Pale, dirt-covered hands, clawing up from the soil, stretching towards me, fingers twitching, nails broken, skin peeling as if they had been buried for centuries.
One of them grabbed my ankle. Cold, wet, real. I screamed and nearly dropped the book, but I remembered the warning. If you stop, you're finished. So I shouted the words even louder, forcing them out between sobs. The hands writhed, twisting, pulling at me. But the instant I finished the last line of the chant, they froze. One by one, they sank back into the soil until nothing remained but the disturbed dirt. I was shaking so badly I could barely crawl out of the pit. My candles were nearly gone, and the darkness pressed in like a living thing. On my way home, I swore I saw someone standing at the end of the dirt road, a tall figure, motionless, waiting. But when I blinked, it was gone. That was only the second night, and I had 5 more to go. By the third night, I wasn't just afraid, I was exhausted. I hadn't slept properly since this all began. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd hear that laugh or feel the cold grip of those hands on my ankle. Still, I dragged myself back to the cemetery. That night, the sky was cloudless, the moon shining down pale and thin like a sickle hanging over the graves. I thought the moonlight might comfort me, but instead it only seemed to make the shadows darker. I lit my candles, sat back in the pit, and opened the book. My lips trembled as I began the chant, the words spilling out in a shaky rhythm. At first, it was quiet, too quiet. The stillness made my skin crawl. And then I heard it, a voice. But this time, it wasn't whispers. It was clear, familiar. It was her voice. The girl I was doing all this for. She was calling my name. Sweet, soft, the way she used to sound on the phone in the middle of the night. My chest tightened. For a second, I almost forgot where I was, almost believed she was standing right outside the circle waiting for me. I clenched the book tighter. It's a trick, I told myself. It's not her. But then her voice changed. It grew sharper, more desperate. Please, help me. I'm stuck. Don't leave me here. I froze, my chant faltering. The man's warning echoed in my skull. They'll try to confuse you. Don't answer. Don't stop. But hearing her cry for me broke something inside me. My heart pounded as I fought the urge to look up. And then she screamed. Not like a person, not like anything human. It was a howl that rattled my bones, high-pitched and jagged, tearing through the night like glass shattering. Every candle flame snapped sideways at once, almost blowing out. I shut my eyes and screamed the chant back at her, forcing the words through my clenched teeth. My whole body shook as the scream echoed, bouncing around the graveyard, growing louder, closer, until suddenly it stopped. Silence. When I finally dared to open my eyes, the candles were steady again. My throat burned raw, but the ritual was finished. I climbed out of the pit, my body drenched in cold sweat. And for the first time, I felt doubt gnaw at me. Because if these spirits could sound like her, then maybe the girl I loved had never been speaking to me at all. Maybe by the fourth night, the fear had hardened into something heavier. My body felt like lead, but my mind was cracked open, raw. I couldn't eat. I couldn't focus. Every sound in the house made me jump. Every shadow on the wall made me think someone was waiting for me. Still, I went back. I had to. The cemetery seemed darker than usual that night, as if the moon itself refused to shine on it. I stumbled to the pit I'd been using, lit my candles and sat down. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep the flame steady. But eventually, the circle was complete. I took a breath and opened the book. The first few lines came out rough, my voice cracked and broken. But as the chant deepened, the air thickened too, like breathing through water. I could feel them gathering, closing in. Then it started. Something moved just outside the circle, a shuffle, then a scrape, then another. Soon it sounded like dozens of feet, dragging through the dirt, circling me. My chest tightened, but I kept chanting. That's when the first hand shot into the pit. It wasn't pale and ghostly this time. It was dark, almost charred, the skin cracked like burned wood. The hand grabbed my wrist, strong, pulling hard enough that my bones screamed. I yanked back, clutching the book to my chest, forcing the words out faster. Another hand grabbed my shoulder, then another clamped around my ankle. They weren't just reaching anymore, they were pulling. The soil at the edge of the grave collapsed inward, as if the ground itself wanted me out of the circle. My knees scraped the dirt, the candles trembled. I could feel the drag, stronger and stronger, like they were trying to tear me from safety. And then I saw them. Figures. Dozens of them, standing just beyond the candlelight. Some tall, some bent and broken, some crawling on all fours. Their bodies twitched and jerked like broken puppets. I couldn't see faces, only hollow, shifting shadows. But their hands were everywhere, reaching, grabbing, desperate. I screamed the chant louder than I ever had before, the words ripping from my throat like fire. The figures shuddered, their grip faltering. One by one, the hands loosened, sliding back into the dirt. By the time I spoke the final line, the pit was silent again. My arms were bruised, my legs streaked with blood where the nails had dug in, but I had survived. When I stumbled home that night, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt hunted. Like every step I took, something was following, waiting for me to return tomorrow night when they'd try again. By the fifth night, my body was wrecked. My arms were covered in purple bruises, my voice raw from screaming the chants, my eyes bloodshot from nights without sleep. I looked like a man already half dead. And yet, something inside me wouldn't let me stop. Maybe it was the obsession. Maybe it was the fear of what would happen if I quit now. So, just past midnight, I dragged myself back to that cursed ground. The cemetery was different that night. The air was thick with fog, rolling low across the graves, curling around my ankles like it was alive. The silence was unbearable. The kind that presses so hard against your skull you start to hear your own blood moving. I lit my candles, but the fog swallowed the light, leaving me trapped in a dim, suffocating bubble. I climbed into the pit, my hands trembling, and began the chant. At first, nothing happened. Just the sound of my own voice, weak, strained. I almost thought maybe they'd grown tired of tormenting me. Then I looked up, and I saw them. Not just shadows this time, faces. Dozens of them floating in the fog beyond the circle. Men, women, children, some with rotting flesh hanging loose. Others, nothing but skull and sinew. Their eyes glowed faintly, pale and hungry, locked on me. They whispered in unison, my name, over and over, like a chant of their own. The sight of them froze me to the core. Their mouths moved wrong, jaws snapping sideways, lips stretching too far. I clutched the book tighter, forcing my voice to rise above theirs. But the more I chanted, the louder they became. And then, one of the faces drifted closer. It was her, the girl I loved, the reason I was doing this. She floated just beyond the candlelight, her hair tangled, her skin gray, her eyes hollow pits that wept black tears. She whispered my name. "Why are you doing this to me?" she asked. Stunned, trembling, my chest collapsed. My throat got dry. Every instinct screamed to answer her, to tell her I was doing it all for her. But I remembered the rule. Don't speak. Don't break the chant. Her face contorted with rage. The black tears ran faster. Her mouth stretched open, far wider than humanly possible. The other spirits shrieked with her, their voices scraping the air like knives. I screamed the last of the chant, my voice shredding as I forced the final words out. And just like that, silence. When I opened my eyes, the faces were gone. The fog thinned. My candles sputtered, but they held. I was alone again. But that night, as I stumbled home, one thought refused to leave my mind. If she wasn't really there, if that was just them wearing her face, then what exactly was I summoning? By the 6th night, I wasn't even sure I was myself anymore. My reflection in the mirror looked hollow, my skin pale, my eyes ringed in black. I caught myself mumbling parts of the chant without meaning to, as if it was seeping into my bones. Still, When midnight came, my legs carried me back to the cemetery like I was on a leash. The pit was waiting. The ground around it was torn and scarred from the night before, like something had clawed at it from the inside. My candles shook in my hands as I set them, but I managed to light them and take my place in the dirt. The moment I began the chant, the air snapped cold. The flames whipped sideways, stretching like they were being sucked toward something. My breath puffed white, and my voice cracked from the first word. Then I heard them. Not outside the circle this time. Inside. At first, it was just the scrape of nails against dirt, then the thud of feet. I froze, staring straight ahead, my voice trembling as I tried to keep chanting. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. A figure. It wasn't beyond the candlelight anymore. It was standing with me, inside the circle. Tall, thin, its head lolling to the side as if its neck was broken. Its skin was stretched too tight over its bones, its arms dangling down like ropes. It didn't move, didn't breathe, just stood there. I kept chanting, my eyes locked on the page, though every instinct screamed to look away. Then another figure stepped in, crawling this time, its joints bending the wrong way, its hands dragging in the dirt as it pulled itself forward. And then another. And another. Until the pit was crowded with them. I could feel the weight of their presence pressing against me, their breath cold on my skin, their bodies brushing my shoulders as they swayed. One leaned close, so close I could smell the rot on its breath, and whispered in a voice that sounded like my own father's, "Stop." My lips shook. My body wanted to obey, but I forced the chant through clenched teeth, my throat raw and bleeding from the effort. The figures began to twitch, their bodies jerking violently, their mouths opening in silent screams. One of them grabbed my hand, its grip like ice. Another pressed its face an inch from mine, its empty eyes boring into me. I thought my mind would snap. But as I gasped out the final words of the chant, the air cracked like a thunderclap. The figures dissolved into smoke, torn apart by the force of it. The pit was empty again. I fell forward, sobbing, my hands shaking so hard I dropped the book into the dirt. The 6th night was over, but I knew the 7th was coming, and I knew, deep in my bones, that it would either grant me what I wanted or kill me where I stood. The 7th night, the final night. By then, I could barely tell dream from reality. I hadn't slept in days. My mind felt like it was unraveling thread by thread. But yet, there was no turning back. The man had told me, 7 nights, complete the ritual, and she'll be yours. So I went. The cemetery felt different that night, like it was waiting. The air was thick, buzzing with a silence that wasn't silence at all. It was the sound of something holding its breath. I dragged myself to the pit. My candles shook in my hands as I set them down. But no matter how many times I struck the lighter, the flames sputtered and died. I kept trying, frantic, my fingers bleeding where the metal scraped them raw. Finally, the flames flared to life. I climbed into the pit, my body trembling, and opened the book. My voice was nothing but a rasp, but I forced the chant out anyway. The ground quaked beneath me. The air grew heavy, pressing down on my chest until I thought my ribs would crack. And then, the graves split open. I watched in horror as the soil erupted around me, skeletons and rotting bodies clawing their way out. Dozens, hundreds surrounding the pit. Their eyes glowed faint white, and they swayed in rhythm to my chant as if I were conducting them. The sky above blackened, clouds swirling into a spiral, lightning flashing without thunder. My candles burned brighter, their flames twisting upward like spears. And then, she appeared. Not a shadow, not a face in the fog, but her. She stepped into the circle, barefoot, her white dress stained dark at the hem. Her hair was tangled, her skin pale, but her eyes, they were hers. The same eyes I'd fallen in love with. She smiled, soft, gentle. "You did this for me?" she asked. My heart nearly broke. I wanted to reach for her, to tell her yes, yes, I endured it all for her. But my hands trembled, frozen around the book. Her smile widened. Too wide. "You shouldn't have." Her face split open, peeling back like torn cloth. Inside was nothing human, only darkness, endless and gnawing. The ground heaved as the dead screeched, their voices rising in a deafening howl. The candles burst, spraying wax across my skin, leaving me in pure darkness. Something grabbed me. Not hands, something bigger. Claws. They wrapped around me, dragging me down into the soil. I screamed, thrashing, but the book slipped from my hands and vanished into the dirt. The last thing I saw was her face, her true face, grinning as the earth swallowed me whole. I don't know how I'm telling you this now. I don't know if I ever made it home or if I've been buried in that cemetery ever since. All I know is the ritual worked. She's with me, and she'll never let me go.
Story 1. My name is Mark Reynolds. I live in Dallas, Texas. My wife was the one who first found this YouTube channel about a month ago. She told me I should share something that happened to us. To be honest, my life has always been filled with strange experiences. But what I'm about to tell you, this one still shakes me whenever I think about it. I've always been a rider. Motorcycles, trucks, off-road. My dad got me into it when I was a kid. I've spent years exploring back roads, abandoned highways, forgotten towns. These days, since my dad's too old to ride, I usually go out with my uncle. He's just as restless as I am. The event I'm about to tell you happened back in 2016, and it scarred me in ways I'll never forget. At that time, I hadn't taken a real trip in over 2 years. The constant grind of running our family business had worn me down. I needed to get away. When my uncle told me he and his crew were headed out west for a week-long trip, I jumped at the chance. My wife insisted she was coming with me. She'd already been on plenty of road trips with me, so I said fine. I had no idea then just how big of a mistake that would turn out to be. The night before we left, my dad warned me not to go. He told me the highways out west were dangerous, that they weren't like the roads around here. "Canceled the trip," he said. But I just brushed him off. "Don't worry, Dad," I told him. "We'll be fine." By the next morning, I was loading up my SUV with everything we'd need. Gas full, coolers packed, snacks ready. My plan was simple: drive all night, make it to Arizona, and meet up with my uncle's crew there. It was supposed to be just another road trip. But by the time the sun went down and the desert swallowed us whole, I realized how wrong I had been. We hit the road just before dawn. My wife sat beside me, her head resting against the window, the glow of the rising sun spilling across her face. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, flat, barren, nothing but scrub and dust as far as the eye could see. Hours passed. We switched off between music and silence, watching the desert roll by. At first, it felt freeing, like the weight of work and stress had been stripped away with every mile. But somewhere around midnight, things started to change. The GPS lost its signal. The radio cut to static. Even our phones had no service. Out there, surrounded by nothing but empty desert, it was like the rest of the world had simply vanished. "Mark, are you sure this is the right way?" "Yeah. Highway 93, we're fine." But deep down, I knew we weren't. I hadn't seen another car in over an hour. The asphalt was cracked, crumbling in places. The signs were old, rusted, some of them so faded you could barely read them. Then the engine sputtered. Once, twice, and before I could even curse, the car died. I coasted us to the shoulder and tried the ignition again. Nothing. Nothing but the hollow click of a dead battery. "Seriously?" my wife groaned. She glanced out into the darkness, unease flickering in her eyes. "There's nothing out here, Mark. Not even a gas station." She was right. The silence pressed in around us. No cars, no lights, not even the sound of wind. Just nothing. That was when I saw it. Far ahead, on the broken highway, a glow. Soft, flickering, like a lantern swaying in the dark. And standing beneath it was a figure. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. But no, the glow was real, swaying faintly in the black desert night. And beneath it stood a figure. "Do you see that?" My wife leaned forward, squinting through the windshield. "Yeah, but what is it?" The figure didn't move,
Didn't wave, didn't step closer. It just stood there, holding what looked like an old-fashioned lantern, its dim light barely piercing the darkness. Something about it felt wrong. My gut twisted, the way it does when you know you're in danger but can't explain why. Against my better judgment, I climbed out of the SUV. Gravel crunched under my boots as I stepped onto the cracked asphalt. "Hey!" I shouted, raising a hand. "We broke down! Can you help us?" The figure didn't answer. It just tilted its head, slowly, to one side. The lantern swung, spilling light across its face. Pale, gaunt, eyes too wide and unblinking. My throat got dry. Then, without warning, the lantern flickered out. Darkness swallowed the road. "Mark, get back in the car!" my wife screamed from behind me. I stumbled backward, fumbling for the door handle, but when I looked again, the figure wasn't standing where it had been. My heart slammed against my ribs as I yanked the door shut and locked it. My wife clutched my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "Mark, it's right there." The figure stood just a few feet from the hood of the SUV, motionless, staring at us through the glass. Its face was pale as bone, lips cracked, eyes shining like wet marbles in the dark. Then it moved. Not like a person should. The steps were jerky, unnatural, almost like each bone in its body snapped into place with every stride. The lantern flickered back to life in its hand, but now the light burned a sickly yellow, casting long, twisted shadows across the road. "Start the car, please, Mark, just start it." I turned the key again and again, but the engine was dead, cold, lifeless. The figure raised its free hand and pressed it against the windshield. The skin was gray, almost translucent, stretched thin over knobby bones. I could see its veins pulsing beneath. And then it smiled. The sound that followed wasn't a voice. It was a rasp, like air forcing its way through broken glass. My wife screamed, burying her face in my shoulder. I grabbed the steering wheel, trapped, powerless, praying for the engine to come back to life. And just when I thought we were done for, the headlights of a semi roared to life behind us. Blinding white light flooded the road as a semi-truck thundered up behind us, its horn blaring. My wife jolted upright. She clutched my arm. The figure snapped its head toward the truck, lantern swinging wildly in its grip. For the first time, I saw its face clearly. Sunken cheeks, black, hollow sockets where eyes should have been. And then, just like that, it was gone. No footsteps, no fading into the distance. One second it stood at the hood of my SUV, the next, the lantern hit the ground with a dull clatter, and the figure dissolved into the night air like smoke. The semi screeched to a halt beside us. A grizzled man in a trucker's cap leaned out the window, shouting over the hiss of his brakes. "You folks all right? Car trouble?" I could barely speak. My throat was dry, my hands shaking. My wife managed to nod. The trucker climbed down. He looked around. Strange place to break down. I ain't much out here except dirt and bad memories. I wanted to ask him if he'd seen the figure, but the words stuck in my chest. Something told me he already knew. He offered to tow us as far as the next truck stop, and we didn't argue. Anything to get away from that stretch of highway. As we pulled away, I glanced back through the rear window. The lantern still lay in the middle of the road, flickering faintly in the dark. And I swear, just before we turned a corner and lost sight of it, I saw a pale hand reach down and pick it up again. We made it to the truck stop just before dawn. The neon lights buzzing overhead felt like salvation after that endless stretch of darkness. My wife wouldn't let go of my hand, her knuckles white, her face pale and drawn. The trucker gave us a sympathetic look as he unhooked the SUV. "Best to avoid that road at night," he muttered. "Folks say it's cursed. Always has been." I wanted to press him, to demand what he meant, but one look at his face told me everything. He'd seen it too. Maybe not the same figure, but something. Enough to know you don't ask questions out here. We got the battery replaced, filled the tank, and drove on. But no matter how many miles we put between ourselves and that desert highway, the feeling never left me. Sometimes, late at night, I'll catch a flicker of yellow light outside our window, just for a second, like an old lantern swaying in the dark. And every time, I remember that smile, that rasping breath, that hand against the glass. Second story. At the time, my younger brother and I were living in Scranton, Pennsylvania, while attending college. This incident happened just a few days after Labor Day weekend. Our uncle had invited us out to the countryside for a wedding. Since it was one of our distant relatives, only my brother and I went, while the rest of the family stayed behind. We arrived about 4 days before the wedding and had been enjoying ourselves. Like most family weddings, the house was alive with music, laughter, kids running around. At night, the women and children would gather, singing and drumming, filling the air with celebration. Among all my cousins, there was only one close to my age, Ethan, my aunt's son. He and I had always been tight, and naturally, we spent most of our time together. The night before the wedding, Ethan and I were having a great time at the bride's house when suddenly Ethan's mom called. She told us to come pick her up. She still hadn't made it over yet and needed a ride. It was already 10 p.m., and in the countryside, that late at night feels like absolute midnight. The streets fall silent, the woods around you go dark, and the air turns heavy. Still, without thinking too much about it, we agreed to go. Our uncle warned us not to take the back way alone, but we brushed him off. That decision would become the biggest mistake of our lives. We even carried a pot of stew with us. It was for Ethan's grandmother, who was too sick to attend the wedding. To get to our aunt's place, we had to hike down from the ridge where the wedding house was, cross the county road, then follow a rough path that ran along the edge of a river, before climbing back up another wooded hillside. It usually took about 30 minutes, so we set out. I kept my phone's flashlight on, cutting through the dark. The road was quiet, except for the occasional passing car or motorcycle in the distance. but soon we had to start climbing uphill into the woods. The trail was steep, rocky, uneven. By the time we reached the top, both of us were breathing hard. The path ahead narrowed into a trail lined on both sides by towering trees. The branches overhead blotted out the moonlight, leaving us in a tunnel of shadows. That's when I noticed Ethan had put on an extra strong cologne earlier that evening. He smelled like he'd practically bathed in it. I didn't think much of it at the time, but later I realized how that scent might have drawn something towards us. We had barely been walking for 2 minutes when suddenly a mountain lion darted across the path right in front of us. My heart nearly stopped. The animal appeared out of nowhere, gliding past in a blur before vanishing back into the trees. For a moment, Ethan and I froze, terrified. Should we keep going or turn back? What if the cougar was stalking us, waiting for us to move? This part of the woods was deserted, and locals avoided it at night. But it was the shortcut, and we were stubborn. We whispered a prayer under our breath and forced ourselves forward. That's when we saw him. An old man appeared ahead on the trail, leaning heavily on a cane. We could hear his raspy cough as he shuffled towards us. Something about him instantly felt wrong. The moment we got close, my phone flashlight flickered out. No matter how many times I tapped, the light wouldn't come back on. The phone felt hot in my hand, like it was overheating. The old man stopped directly in front of us. His face was nothing but sharp bones under thin, stretched skin. His clothes were white but torn and filthy, hanging off him like rags. In a shaky, broken voice, he croaked, "What are you boys doing here?" I swallowed hard. "We're here for the wedding, just heading back home now." He didn't reply. His bloodshot eyes stared at us with a madness that made my skin crawl. Then, slowly, his gaze fixed on Ethan, and without another word he started walking again, chuckling under his breath in some strange language neither of us understood. I shot Ethan a look, signaling we needed to get out of there, but he just stood frozen, staring at the man like something invisible was holding him in place. His eyes filled with tears. Panicked, I lunged forward and shoved the old man hard. He collapsed to the ground, and the spell broke. Ethan snapped out of it and bolted. I didn't hesitate. I sprinted right behind him. As we ran, an unhuman sound split the silence. The old man was crying, but it wasn't human crying. It wasn't even animal. It was a warped, guttural wail, something that didn't belong in this world. And then things got worse.
We ran as fast as we could, crashing through the trees, but the sound of that unearthly crying echoed behind us, rising higher, sharper, almost like it was following. Then Ethan's foot caught on a branch, and he went down hard. I skidded to a stop, turned back, and froze. The old man was coming after us, not walking, not even limping. He was crawling on all fours, unnaturally fast, his bony hands clawing at the dirt as he dragged himself toward us. I yanked Ethan up with all my strength. The pot of stew slipped from my other hand, crashing into the undergrowth. The lid flew off, and the food spilled across the ground. And instantly, the crying stopped. Just like that, silence fell. The forest around us seemed to hold its breath. My pulse hammered in my ears as we stumbled forward, desperate to get away. But the path ahead only grew darker. We were coming up on a stretch of woods everyone in town whispered about, a place where a woman was rumored to have practiced black magic. Years ago, they'd found her body there, and ever since, people swore the area was cursed. Nobody walked that path after sundown, but we had no choice. My phone light still wouldn't work. In desperation, I restarted it, and to my relief, the flashlight blinked back on. A tiny comfort in the suffocating dark. We crept forward carefully, every step feeling heavier than the last. That's when we heard it, a faint crackle, like dry wood burning, the sound of fire. I leaned close to Ethan and whispered, "Don't look, just keep walking, eyes straight ahead." We pressed on, hearts pounding. Their house was just beyond this patch. If we could make it through, we'd be safe. But suddenly, I heard Ethan cry out. The sound of his voice ripped through me. I spun around, and he was gone. Panic surged through me. I swung the flashlight frantically. That's when I saw it. A shape. A thing dragging Ethan toward the fire. It wasn't a person. It wasn't even fully visible. It was like a distorted shadow, a presence clutching him with invisible hands. "Ethan!" I screamed, lunging forward. I grabbed his arms and pulled with everything I had. The air around us stank, a foul, choking stench like rot and sulfur that made my stomach heave. My ears rang with a low, buzzing howl that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. I wrenched him free, and we bolted. Neither of us looked back. We couldn't. It felt like something else was running alongside us, matching our pace, breathing down our necks. We didn't stop until the lights of his mother's house came into view. We stumbled through the door, gasping for air. Our clothes streaked with dirt and sweat. Ethan's face was pale, his lips trembling, his eyes wide, as if he'd left part of himself back in those woods. The family rushed over, demanding to know what happened. But when we told them, their faces only hardened with anger. "Why did you take that path?" our uncle snapped. "We warned you never to go through there at night." We tried to explain, but Ethan could barely speak. His whole body was shaking, tears streaking down his face. That wasn't just fear. It was like something still had its grip on him. Our aunt wasted no time. She pulled him inside and called for prayers. They lit candles, whispered blessings over him, and read aloud from the Bible. Ethan flinched at first, then collapsed, sobbing. Slowly, little by little, his breathing steadied. I sat frozen, my own hands trembling. That stench from the woods, that choking sulfur rot, still clung to my nostrils, and I swore I could hear faint footsteps outside the house, pacing back and forth in the dirt. For the rest of the wedding, we didn't step outside once. The music, the laughter, the fireworks, none of it mattered anymore. We were too shaken, too hollowed out to join. Even now, years later, when I think back to that night, a chill runs through me. I'll never forget the sight of that old man crawling toward us, his cries echoing through the trees. And I'll never forget the way Ethan looked when the shadows tried to drag him away. Some paths you should never walk. Some shortcuts are never worth it. And if you ever find yourself in the countryside, standing at the edge of dark woods, with nothing but a flashlight in your hand, remember my story. And don't go in.
Third story. My name is Daniel Price, and I grew up in the quiet outskirts of Ohio, the kind of place where fields stretch for miles and neighbors are few and far between. When I was in my early 20s, my cousin Jacob invited me to spend a weekend with him out at an old farmhouse his family had inherited. It wasn't far from the state line, tucked deep off a gravel road, surrounded by dense woods and empty fields. The place had stood empty for years, but Jacob said it would be the perfect spot for us to get away. No distractions, no neighbors, just a chance to drink a few beers, play cards, and catch up like we used to. The moment we pulled up the long dirt driveway, though, I felt uneasy. The farmhouse loomed tall and weathered, its windows dark, the front porch sagging like it hadn't felt footsteps in decades. The shutters creaked faintly in the late summer wind, and the entire property carried that heavy silence you only find in forgotten places. "Come on," Jacob said with a grin, slinging his duffel over his shoulder. "Don't let it creep you out already. Place has been empty for years. Nobody out here but us." Still, as I followed him up the porch steps, I couldn't shake the feeling that the house was watching us. Inside, the air was stale, thick with dust and the faint odor of damp wood. We flicked on a lantern since the power hadn't been connected, and its glow revealed faded wallpaper peeling at the seams, a staircase rising into shadows, and family portraits that had yellowed with age. That first night, we stayed downstairs in the front room, talking and laughing to shake off the atmosphere. But later, when Jacob stepped outside to grab more wood, I thought I heard something upstairs. It wasn't a creak or the usual settling of an old house. It was distinct, like slow, deliberate footsteps crossing the floor above us. I froze, staring up at the ceiling. The sound stopped as soon as Jacob returned, and when I told him, he just smirked. "Old houses make noises, Danny. Don't start freaking yourself out." I tried to laugh it off, but in the back of my mind, one thought lingered. Those footsteps sounded too heavy to be the house. The next morning, sunlight streaming through the grimy windows almost made me forget what I'd heard. Almost. Jacob was in high spirits, frying bacon on a little camping stove he'd set up in the kitchen. The house felt less menacing with daylight filtering in, and we spent most of the day outside, walking the property, exploring the overgrown barn, even shooting cans off fence posts with his old rifle. By the time night fell again, I was more relaxed. Maybe I had imagined the footsteps. That night, after a couple of beers, we turned in. We had dragged a couple of mattresses into the living room, right in front of the old stone fireplace. The lantern cast long shadows up the walls as the wind pressed against the house. I must have dozed off, because the next thing I remember is waking suddenly. The fire had burned down to embers, the lantern dim, and Jacob was snoring softly beside me. At first, I wasn't sure what had pulled me out of sleep. Then I heard it. From upstairs, again, those same slow, deliberate footsteps, crossing from one side of the room to the other. This time, I knew I wasn't dreaming. I sat up, heart pounding, straining to hear. The boards above us creaked one by one, then stopped. Silence pressed in. I held my breath. Then came a new sound, a dragging noise, like something heavy being pulled across the floor above us. I shook Jacob awake. "Jake, listen." He groaned, rubbed his eyes, then frowned. He'd heard it too. For a long moment, we just sat there, staring up at the ceiling, waiting. The dragging stopped. Jacob grabbed the rifle. "Stay here," he whispered, though I could see his hands shaking. Before I could stop him, he started toward the stairs. And that's when we heard it, clear as day. A single, heavy footstep coming down the stairs. Then silence. Jacob froze halfway to the staircase, the rifle clutched tight in his hands. The house was silent again, except for the faint ticking of the lantern. Then, another footstep echoed. Closer this time, halfway down the stairs. My chest tightened. Every instinct in me screamed to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I stared at the dark mouth of the stairwell, waiting to see who or what would emerge. Jacob called out, his voice unsteady. "Who's there? This is private property." No answer, just the creak
of another step. And then we saw it. Something pale appeared between the banisters. At first, it looked like a hand, thin, bony fingers curling around the railing. Then slowly, a face leaned into view. It was a woman, or at least something shaped like one. Her skin was ashen, her eyes sunk deep and black, her mouth stretched too wide, pulling into a grin that made my stomach churn. She didn't walk so much as lurch, each movement stiff, unnatural, as though her body wasn't used to moving anymore. Jacob raised the rifle, but before he could even steady it, the lantern flickered violently and went out. The room plunged into darkness. I heard Jacob curse, the scrape of his boots as he backed up, and then, so close to my ear, I could feel the breath, a whisper. "You shouldn't have come here." I screamed, fumbling for Jacob, for the rifle, for anything, but in that blackness I couldn't find him. All I could hear was her laugh, low, broken, circling us in the dark. I stumbled blindly in the dark, my hand scraping against the rough wallpaper as I tried to find the doorway. Jacob was shouting my name somewhere in the blackness, his voice panicked, but I couldn't see him. Then, all at once, the lantern flared back to life on its own. Its weak glow spilled across the living room. Jacob stood near the fireplace, rifle trembling in his hands, but the stairs where she had been were empty. "She was right there," I gasped. "You saw her?" His face was pale, lips tight. "I saw something. We're not staying another night in this damn place." We grabbed our bags without even repacking them properly. Jacob kept the rifle raised as I shoved our things together. The air in the house had changed. It was heavier now, charged like a storm pressing down on the roof. Every step toward the front door felt like wading through water. My skin prickled with the sensation of being watched from every shadow. We reached the door, Jacob twisting the old brass knob. Click. It wouldn't budge. He rattled it harder, cursing under his breath. "It's stuck." "No," I whispered, staring at the knob. I could see it, moving, slowly, like something was turning it back from the other side. Jacob slammed his shoulder against the door again and again until finally the frame cracked and the whole thing burst open. Cold night air rushed in, and we bolted onto the porch. But as we ran down the steps, I risked one last glance back at the house. Through the upstairs window, she stood watching us. That pale face pressed against the glass, grinning. We didn't stop running until we reached Jacob's truck, parked halfway down the dirt drive. He fumbled with the keys, dropped them once, cursed. Then, finally, he managed to crank the engine to life. Gravel spit from the tires as we tore down the road. The farmhouse shrank into darkness behind us. Neither of us spoke for miles. My chest heaved, ears ringing. Every shadow outside the windows felt alive. Finally,
Jacob broke the silence. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "Danny," she spoke to me. I turned to him. My throat was dry. What did she say? He swallowed hard. She told me, "You're not leaving." It shocked pause. I felt the blood drain from my face, because in my pocket, I still had the old brass house key, the same key Jacob had used to open the door when we first arrived. Only neither of us had put it there. It was ice cold against my leg. I rolled down the window, hurled the key into the night. I watched it vanish into the dark fields. We never went back to that farmhouse. Jacob sold the land a year later, cheap, just to be rid of it. But sometimes, late at night, I'll wake to the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps above my apartment ceiling. And when I do, I can't help but wonder, did we really leave her behind?
Story 5. My name is Zach, and this is the true story of what happened to my older brother, James, back in December of 2011. At that time, James was 24. He ran a small convenience store in town, and he was in great shape. He lifted weights regularly, built like a bodybuilder. We lived in a middle-class neighborhood just outside a college campus, and I was still in high school. One winter, our cousins came down from another state, let's say from Denver, to our small town in Missouri for a visit. During their stay, one of our cousins, a girl close to James's age, started getting close to him. They hung out a lot, went around town, and after a week or two, they went back home. But soon after that, she cut off all contact with him. James even drove all the way to Denver trying to see her, but it turned out she'd only been stringing him along. She wanted a guy with money, and we were just a regular middle-class family. James came home crushed. That's when someone suggested he go talk to an old spiritual man, a man people said could help with problems of the heart. And James, desperate and heartbroken, listened. That man told him to perform a ritual, a dangerous one, alone, at night. And against all reason, James agreed. In our neighborhood, everything shut down by 10 p.m. There was an old oak tree near my school that locals whispered was haunted. It gave everyone the creeps after dark. That was the very spot where the old man instructed James to carry out his ritual. So James began sneaking out late at night under the excuse of hanging with friends. But he was really going to that tree. He kept it up for over 2 weeks, 15, maybe 18 nights. One evening, people noticed him heading toward the school at midnight. Someone asked, "Where are you going?" James said, "To pray." Yes, there was a small chapel near there, but everyone knew the time had long passed for prayer. Folks warned him not to go, told him to just head home. But James kept going anyway, night after night. Then one night, he burned all his clothes. Our friends told us afterwards, horrified. The very next morning, he walked out into the middle of the main road and stood there shouting, "I couldn't do it. I made a mistake. I was impure in that place. I failed the ritual." Friends rushed to pull him off the road and brought him home, sitting him down on the porch. We were all confused. whispering, trying to make sense of what was happening. And then out of nowhere, someone ran up from the market saying, "James is there right now, acting crazy." We froze, because we had just seen him sitting in front of us. People at the market swore he had suddenly appeared, walked into a store, grabbed a 2-liter, and drank it all down right there in front of everyone. Nobody dared stop him. Later we learned he had climbed across a neighbor's roof and dropped down into the market like some wild animal. That's when we all realized something was seriously wrong.
My dad was at work when it all began. When he came home and saw James's state, he decided maybe a change of environment would help. He took him along to his job for a while, but James caused a scene there too, screaming, fighting, so badly that a security guard actually beat him to try and control him. It didn't work. Things only got worse. At night, his condition would spiral out of control. Our neighbors were kind people, but everyone began to worry. One night, we decided to lock James in a bedroom so he couldn't hurt anyone. That's when it got terrifying. Inside, he started crying, then laughing, then smashing things. Though he'd only gone to 8th grade, he suddenly spoke with complex words, strange phrases, in languages none of us thought he knew, including English. His eyes would glow blood red, and none of us could bear to look straight into them. Some nights he wouldn't eat at all. When we put food in front of him, he spat it out and snarled, "I don't want food. I want blood. I want meat." We tied his arms, his legs, even covered his eyes with cloth, but he would still contort himself, flipping upside down, impossible to restrain. He destroyed his room completely. Women were kept away from him for safety. Friends came over every night to stay in our house, just in case he attacked. Even then, 2 or 3 people couldn't hold him down. His strength was unnatural. My dad had retired by then and was living off his pension. He took James to different healers, but nothing worked. Some tried, and James would lash out at them. Others wouldn't even touch him. Finally, out of desperation, they took him to a mental hospital. But the moment James was admitted, he suddenly acted normal, calm, smiling, as if nothing had ever been wrong. The doctor said, "He's fine, take him home." But when my mom and dad explained everything, the doctor agreed to keep him overnight. I stayed with Mom while James was locked in a barred room. That night, he cried to me through the bars, "Jack, look at what's happened to me. Please, let me out. Open the lock." When I stepped closer, his face twisted. He lunged, clawing at me, ripping my skin. My face bled so badly, the staff had to drag me away. After 2 or 3 days, the hospital staff admitted, "This isn't mental illness. This is something else. We can't help him." We brought him home, and immediately his violence started again. He stopped bathing, stank of rot, urinated in corners. One night, he even leapt off the roof, injuring his back. At last,
An older spiritual man came to our house. He read prayers over James, and for the first time, my brother seemed calmer. The man told us James had been possessed by dozens of spirits, 40, maybe more. It all traced back to that ritual. He had performed it at the haunted tree while unclean, and because of that, the spirits turned against him, determined to destroy him. After that, James began making horrific sounds, sometimes speaking in women's voices, sometimes shouting in languages we couldn't understand. Our lives stopped. Everything revolved around guarding him. Weeks passed. Then one day, one of our elder brothers brought another spiritual man, someone with a powerful reputation. The moment this man stepped into our house, everything went silent. The air felt heavy, frozen. He walked straight to James, touched only his finger, and James, who no one could ever restrain, sat down instantly, like a child. None of us will ever forget that. The man whispered something we couldn't hear. He prayed, and slowly, James returned to normal. Weak, sick, but himself again. The man warned us, if I hadn't come when I did, the spirits would have taken him away. They found strange charms and rings buried at the site of the ritual, evidence of what had been lurking there all along. It took James nearly 2 years to fully recover. He eventually took over my father's job, and to this day, he's mostly normal, though sometimes he gets moody, emotional. But I will never forget what I saw in his eyes during those nights. It wasn't my brother looking back. It was something else.